get started this morning. Before we get started, specifically going through Psalms 19 and 33, I won't spend much time today talking about the structure or, broad and general sense of the Psalms. I think Brian and Elliot both touched on that quite a bit. But I would ask a question of us to start. In general, when do each of you find yourself looking for the Psalms? When do you, maybe more plainly, when is a good time in your life when you find yourself, if I need, something to comfort me or something to encourage me or something to, motivate me? There's different books of the Bible that we all go to, right? But when do you find yourself reaching for the Psalms? When is that does anybody have specific times in their life or emotions that they know they encounter when you're the Psalms? And I know there's a lot there. It's a broad question, but just looking for some general thoughts of what you guys think in regards to certain times of your life, whether they're sparked by the Psalms and going to the Psalms.
When I was, when it was just me and Nora, and I lived in my little house by myself, I would, at night when it was real dark and kind of scary, I would turn on the Psalms and let it read out loud and just fall asleep to it because it made me feel safe and,
very
comforted.
Soothing,
Yeah.
Comforting, or maybe at a time when you are looking for some peace.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Anybody else?
When I'm looking, when I'm looking for something to encourage somebody else, just some words of wisdom.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Small, concise, bits of encouragement or comfort you want to give to others or just get for yourself. I think it's exactly right. Okay.
Well, usually when I'm discouraged and I'm looking for something to change my perspective, we talked last class time about how he seems like he's in anguish and lamenting over all these things, and at the very end he'll say, but God has brought me through this, or I can trust him, and it just helps me change my perspective when it's very easy to get bogged down in something that discourages you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, for me, especially through it as we turn to the Psalms, one thing I've really noticed is something you guys have all said. It's a, very soothing, comforting, encouraging, place that you can turn to. And, obviously the Bible inspired in so many different ways and so many different books. You can look for wisdom and, you can look for comfort in lots of books. But it's so interesting to me and so awesome to me how neat and sometimes simple the Psalms can make you have those same emotions and feelings. And what one thing I've thought about, this week as well is just in general the relationship with God. Your own personal relationship with God. When sometimes maybe you don't feel as close, or sometimes you feel like I'm just a little separated, a little distant. When you think about some of David's words to God and how he spoke to God and how he just sometimes poured out his heart, obviously very eloquently in a way that many of us, I know myself, would lack. But it started with his relationship with God, being comfortable enough to, offer the praise that, is so evident as you walk through his life, to look for God and everywhere, but also to ask for his help and ask for his comfort. And so, that's one thing that I would encourage us to, as we go through the book, to continue to, think about developing that relationship, on a level that, our plain words would be enough to grow closer, and to really always rely on God to have that kind of back and forth conversation, which we're seeing here. So I think that's just an opening thought as we dig a little deeper. Before we do, I'd like to say a word of prayer. Caleb, if you wouldn't mind to.
Our Lord, our God, our Father, we're so thankful for this time to be able to come here and to be able to open up your word and to study it with each other, to hear from each other, and to learn ways that we can apply it into our lives this week and each day. We ask that you be with Nick and that he would have a good recollection of what he's studied and what he's prepared. And we ask that we might all have open minds, open hearts to be able to receive it and to be able to change our lives in a positive way and change those around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we'll dive into Psalm 19. Psalm 19 and Psalms 33 are what we'll cover today. And Psalm 19, I think, is well known to many of us. There's many hymns that probably come off the top of your mind when you're first thinking about Psalm 19. There's lots of different things, and if you break Psalm 19 down into a couple different parts, right? It's mainly about God revealing himself to us in a couple different ways, through the world, through his creation, and then his revelation, by his word. David, I talked a little bit, I thought about it, obviously you can tell my mind's been thinking about David and his writing of this psalm. And there's lots of different ways you can imagine David and when and how he wrote these. But as you start to think about this psalm and where he starts, it's all, you could easily see David just kind of alone, at night, maybe as he's guarding a flock. Could be when he's young, or it could be as he's older, and just kind of looking out at the expanse and kind of feeling that emotion, the gravity of God, revealing himself just as plainly as he can be by his creation. And that's something that we'll talk about this morning, that's so evident in our lives, right? It's easy for us to think about times where we are in awe, of nature, or places that we go to find that connection to God. And it's really about turning that and letting that be exactly what he's meant to be, which is just an expression of who he is by his creation, that he's revealing himself to the world just simply through the creation of this earth, and so that others can see God through that creation. So we'll start there, kind of in verses 1 through 6, and then I'm going to dive into a little bit more. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens he has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat." So, when you start there, just in verse 1, it's obvious that what's being revealed is there is, just by looking around, looking up at the sky, whether that be in the morning or at night, as we're talking, to be us, his creation, to know that he is in it by simply looking out at that evidence. That's simply just, that is saying it's enough for us to look up at the heavens and to examine the glory of God and to know, and so, again, I want to focus on the simplicity of those statements, to think about a lot of times those that ignore God, right? Those that choose not to see God's work. It can start as simply, looking around at the world. And so often we ignore some of those things. It's easy, right, to get up sometimes, and I don't know if you guys are like me. Sometimes you get the thoughts of the day going, right, and you're already going, and you can get all the way to the end of the day, and Nikki or someone will say something to me like, "Did you see that moon tonight? Or did you know this and this happened?" And I would be completely oblivious, just completely oblivious. Now, obvious, we come, we're in a time now where that's much easier for it to happen to us. That they're at that time being in, working the earth out in the open constantly, it would have been much more, part of their everyday life to be so influenced by nature and light and darkness. And, sometimes for us, that's just not the case, right? We don't, we can flip on a switch, or, you know, we don't have to see, you know, dark at all if we don't want to. You know, same way, if we don't want to, you know, enjoy the sun, we don't have to. We can go in somewhere and, you know, turn on the cool air and just, you know, ignore the outside creation. And so, you know, so it can happen to us as much as anyone for us to, you know, forget about God's evidence that he just lays plainly by his creation. And so, you know, that's what it's starting there in verse 1. And, you know, you can also go in a couple different ways. You know, as you read in verse 3, it says, there is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. And so, what does that verse mean to you specifically when it says there's no speech or language? That mean anything to anybody specifically in the context of, you know, all of us as creation understanding God?
Looks like he's using irony because he says, verse 2, they do, excuse me, it does pour forth speech, but it does it without it being audible.
Right.
You know, it's what we are witnessing every day if we choose to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's constantly speaking.
Right.
All the time. You know, it's just speaking and speaking and speaking.
Right. And so it's interesting, I think, in a way, because, like I said, it talks about it being a silent witness of some type, but also the fact that it's speaking to everyone and anyone, and it can't be ignored. Matt?
Before God even starts his revelation about himself and his word, we can come to conclusions about who he is based on just his creation. Like Randy was saying, no words, nothing's spoken at all, there's nothing said. But it's declared in what he's created, in the order of things, day and night. I think I read a commentary, it talked about something like, we wouldn't even know, if all we had was day, we would never know what was behind that, and the glory of God's amazing creation that night reveals with his stars and everything. And so that all declares something about who God is before we even hear a word spoken.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly right. Any other thoughts? Yeah, so it just, you know, it means to me sometimes that, you know, we can and feel a need sometimes to fill the void with our words. You know, in so many different, I mean, there's, you know, hundreds and millions of dollars spent into, you know, understanding the complexity of nature and just writing words and books about it and all of these things. And, you know, not to trivialize any of our, you know, trying to understand, you know, God's creation, but sometimes you have to just simply need to enjoy it. You know, you don't have to be, you know, this broad scholar, you know, someone who's, you know, really, you know, diving into, you know, the meaning of all the root words and the origins. You just have to go outside, right? Go outside and look up. Look up at any time. Look around. You don't have to be, you know, a brilliant person to appreciate a brilliant creation. And I think that's you know, there's a gap sometimes in our world as we move forward, you know, technologically or more and more in our understanding about just appreciating the simple things, you know, God's creation. So, and again, it's, as Randy pointed out, I think it's just great to think about that irony, right? Something that can say so much, right, without ever speaking a word that you could, you know, understand. So, and we'll go further into that thought, right? I really want us to think about understanding who God is through looking, you know, at his creation. Looking, and when I talk about creation, let's just focus today on what we're focused here on: the heavens, you know, the sun, the stars, the sky. Let's think about what are some attributes of God that you know, David obviously here, very concise, you know, and we could spend lots and lots of times talking about all the different things about, even just if you've limited to the stars and the sun, about how complex they are. I mean, people wrote books and books and books, but for us to turn that into just some simple characteristics of God, nature of God. When you look at the stars and the sky and the sun, what do they tell you about God and his nature?
He's orderly.
He's orderly? Yeah, absolutely. Everything is, the way I could think of that too is orderly is consistent, faithful. It happens. It repeats itself over and over and over again. You can count on it. You know, it's very consistent. Yeah.
Provides for us day and night.
Yeah, it's a provider. Yes, it is. It is always there. You know, and it's who's going to continue to nourish us. You know, when you think about the sun specifically is, you know, what does he compare it to? Bridegroom or a champion runner, you know, a race, someone who could be, you know, something that just is to be awed or you'd be inspired by, you know, just by its pure strength of reaching out and touching anything and everything in this world. What else?
Just the extreme intelligence beyond anything you can imagine. We're tilted perfectly so that we have seasons. We're exactly the right distance from the sun so that we don't burn up or that we're not too cold. We have a blanket around us, the atmosphere that protects us, and just, you know, things that we can never comprehend.
Yeah.
Or plan.
Right. We have tried to understand, but ultimately, what that says to me, right, is to look at God's power and the complexity of all those things. It's just infinite. It's infinite. All of the complexities of the world, how things are perfectly planned. That goes back to the orderly, but also just in a different way to think about just someone that can be in control of the sun, the stars, you know, and you know, you can hear that hundreds of times in your life and never be, you know, the whole 2 to 3 degrees, you know, difference in the sun. You know, think about how perfectly God's planned for us. You know, I don't know if you go outside sometimes, you don't necessarily feel that 2 to 3 degrees, right? I mean, always, sometimes you do. But to think about life being literally resting on that tiny precipice of, you know, a couple degrees and the world we know to be completely different, you know, but yet, and God's planned it for us to be able to enjoy his creation, to thrive in his creation, just by how he's, you know, infinitely powerful, infinitely complex, you know, beyond our, you know, wildest imagination. What else?
I think also he has an appreciation for beauty.
Yes. Yep.
And he created us in his image to appreciate the same beauty that he created.
Yep.
And then, you know, placed us in the middle of it.
Yep.
To appreciate what he made.
Yep.
We have the same sort of connection and reaction to the beauty that he created that I assume that he had when he created it.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's strongly, you know, referenced in the, you know, using that metaphor of the bridegroom. You know, someone who is, you know, just exuberant, joyful, like, you know, one of the greatest days of your life, you know. God appreciates beauty. He appreciates joy. He appreciates, you know, kind of radiating in those things. You know, kind of looking at the splendor of the world, and he appreciates those things. Absolutely. Anything else?
You know, and it ties in, going back to Job,
Yep.
when he spoke, just going to what Brett said is, he appreciates the horse, the ostrich, you know, just the way we should, and the way we should look at the sun and appreciate it. And we know so much more than David knew.
Mm-hmm.
We have all these facts now that we can just pull up
Right.
in a second
Right.
and learn, you know, more and more. But does that really wash over us?
Right.
Or does it just bounce off of us? You know, do we
Right.
truly,
Or
you know, be in
sometimes
awe of it?
Right, or sometimes does it make it more difficult for us to be in all of what we're seeing, because we can understand and learn more about it. And they can, at that time, they just really appreciated the beauty for what it was, magnificence for what it was, absolutely. Yeah. I think that the last thing I had written down when I thought about understanding the nature of God, through looking at the stars and the sun, is probably the simplest one to me, is God's everywhere. He is everywhere, and all pervasive, and in all of creation, and all of he's omnipresent, he's omniscient. That is absolutely, when you think about the creator of the stars and the suns, they are part of everything that moves on this earth and the reason that it does. And so, that's as we said, we've talked about that being something that can lapse over us, but God being, an all-powerful, and everywhere for us is also a characteristic.
These verses a lot, they're talking mainly about, actual physical creation, like nature, all that kind of stuff. But I think we often overlook the fact of creation as in ourselves as well, and how us made in a specific image of God, we as living, breathing human beings display everything else that this verse says.
Yeah.
In my line of work, I've been fortunate enough to really study the human body, and I don't know everything about it, but when you look inwardly at yourself as the creation that you are, sometimes it's almost more awe-inspiring or astounding than even just looking out, and how orderly and intentional and everything is, just us and ourselves as an element of his creation.
Yeah.
So I know we get, kind of forget that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it's not exactly what he has to focus on. It's easy for us to sometimes kind of, when we talk about complexity or having a plan or all the attributes that we've talked about, certainly, ourselves as humans, so many different things you can think about of how, being made in his image is such a, a truly powerful thing. And you don't have to look far to be amazed by the human body and its characteristics, for sure.
David was impressed with that same thing. I believe it was David that said we're fearfully and wonderfully made.
That's correct.
There's I can't think of his name right now, but he wrote a book, Fearfully and Wonderfully, kind of in collaboration with a doctor, that if you ever get a chance to read it, it's some amazing things about how we are made.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that's to look at, so knowing those characteristics, about God, looking at those specifically, as David laid them out here, what are some things that we, could apply to our lives we can use to, caution ourselves or to encourage ourselves, right? One of those, I think, sometimes is to simply let ourselves be humbled in the presence of God's creation, whatever that is. In any of the ways that we've talked about, sometimes it can be because of, our limited understanding, or sometimes it can be because we have too much understanding, that we get down the path of thinking we know and we understand things on such a level that maybe we don't relate to others, and, it's hard, and one person, no matter how much learning you can gain on this world, right, you're just going to be a small, infinite person than what you can learn from God, and letting ourselves be humbled by God's creation, is, like I said, like we talked about, not always an easy thing. Sometimes it's easy for us to get going and, worry about our life and, take time to let God's creation speak to us. Also, you can go a little far in that, as I was thinking, right? You can sometimes get so, concerned with this creation, obsessed with, enjoying his creation. That's a real, sometimes you tend to think about that, right? You just kind of take it, for what it is. But, we've got to understand sometimes not just, enjoy the outdoors to enjoy them, right? Because we love being outside, or whatever it is for you in this world that, you love to interact with, always turning that back to God and being appreciative, for its availability in your life, because it comes from Him. It's just a, I think it's a reminder. And then, I think we can always be mindful and cautious of trying to, get straight about a world who tries to understand a lot, and not that, again, not to trivialize any of those matters because they've helped us greatly, but, there's only as much as you can learn, as much as you can, be knowledgeable about the stars and the universe, and there's going to come a point, right, where there's just a giant gap between our understanding of God's, and resting on the fact that He has the full plan, He has it in control is something that's I think important. So then we kind of transition here in verses 7 through 11. So we talked about God.
Just kind of one of the things that I think about. You asked. I'm a little slow, Nick. I'm thinking through the stuff you said. But going back to your first question, when do you come to the Psalms? To me, is when your faith grows weak. In Hebrews, to me, it says the basic foundation. He says three things there in Hebrews 11. We got to believe that He exists. He spoke this world into existence, and He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. And I think the Psalms, especially these first 6 verses and the things that we've talked about, help. That is the basic foundation, and it helps us get back to that when our faith grows weak. Yeah. I want to think my faith will never get to the point where I believe God doesn't exist, that He didn't speak the world into existence, and then that He's not a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. I think I'll always believe that. So these verses helps you get back to there and then build back up. Yeah. And to me that is so very comfortable or comforting to know that, and to see that in His creation and all of that shows that to us, and it allows you to always believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. A way to strengthen our faith, in these words is absolutely, a time when we feel weak. Is that completely agree. And so as we, continue to transition to, David's words here about his praise and his glory for God and how we can understand more about God, let's read verses 7 through 11. He says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are sure and altogether righteous. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the comb. By them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward." So we get a switch here, which is kind of drastic, when you think about it, right? Because when you think about God's creation, all of the beauty and the things that we talked about, that are, they fill you with that same emotion. Even though it's a drastic switch, it's meant, I think it's purposely placed together, right? Because just as perfect as God's creation is as perfect as His law. As perfect as the words that He's spoken to us, and as much appreciation that we can have. And sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's easier, or maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's easier for you to appreciate the Bible and His words and how so beautifully woven than it is a sunset. But those two are very, very connected in just their purity and perfection. God's law is perfect. Not just, in ways of, complexity and how it ties together, but in simplicity too. We love Him, He loves us, and He wants us to understand. The more we understand the law, His law, the more that it provides for us. The more that we get away from and get into our own thoughts and our own making our way into the world, the less we are, connected to Him and making it through the world on His own. When He talks about the statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. Those, in one way, I think also we can specifically, point to God's word is authoritative. It is enough and it is all. And we don't have to, and we can't, resist it. We don't need to resist it. And it's enough for us to be fulfilled by. God's words are enough. And, it doesn't just leave there, right? It's talking about, the fear of the Lord is also pure. It's sometimes a cultural piece, I don't want to sound like the get off my lawn guy, but it's sometimes our society has gone so far away from just a respect for, authority in general and wanting to do our own things just to do them. And there is a beauty in being a created one who is under the authority of the most powerful. And, knowing that his word is, endures forever and is altogether righteous. There's so much when you think about, God's word being, given to us and the way that it works in our lives and helps bring us out of dark times and guides us into prosperous times. And, it's always there for us. We talked about why I asked that question when we go to the Psalms, right? Because if we are letting our life be directed by the Scripture, we'll feel that each day. Each day it gives us a plan. It gives us, preparation. It gives us instruction. So many different things. So, any thoughts on verses 7 through 11, and how that and what that means to us and to you all, Matt?
Just kind of looking at both of these sections that you kind of highlighted. It's amazing because when we think, like, I'm kind of going back to when I became a Christian, and I could see creation, and it was obvious after I started believing in God that you could see in creation that God exists and He has order and intelligence and a purpose in what He created. But it kind of leaves you wanting, or like, okay, there's this intelligent being. I want to know more about that. We don't learn everything we maybe want to know just through creation. So then He dives deeper, and then He gives us His word, and we find out He's loving, and and there's a similar order and even a more beautiful order in some ways to His law and who He is and His word, and they're kind of similar like in that regards, but it's also like it adds to it for us. It's a relational thing. God comes down and He wants to have a relationship with us, and there's beauty in that. He gives us morals and purpose, and so I think it's just a really good, complementary, these two sections that build upon each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's exactly right. Yes.
It seems to me that it's kind of as I look at the beauty of Psalm 19, that it's a natural progression if we're really thinking about what we see. We look at the heavens, there's a limitation that the Psalm starts out with. What is this beautiful, wonderful, amazing creation declaring to us? What is it pointing out to us? Not the will of God. It kind of sends us in that direction, but it declares the glory and the handiwork of God, which I interpret the handiwork to mean the power of God. This is what God has done as we look up at that. And as the brother here just said, that I wanted to know more about that being that could create such a thing. So it kind of directs us to His will.
Right.
His will is not revealed in the creation. And I think some people make the mistake, that, well, I'm worshiping God by being out in nature and this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
But His will, then the second half that we're in now, shows us His will and the glory of His will and His amazing will.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. His will and His word, for us, those are, while creation is enough for us to understand the glory of God, who He is, understand some about His characteristics, God's word fills us up. it fills us up. It gives us direction. It gives us, at any point when our soul needs restoring, when we need to find a way, that's where, God's will and his law, is perfect. So, kind of ending there, when you think about verses 12, 13, and 14, he says, who can discern his errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant also from willful sins. May they not rule over me. Then will I be blameless, innocent of great transgression. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So as, we think about the first two parts of this psalm, God's perfect creation, his perfect law. David obviously, puts that in contrast to what we are, and that is ultimately, we're imperfect beings. I mean, we fall short of his creation. We fall short of his, but he, through his law and through his word, has made a way for us by submitting to him and submitting to, his revelation, that we can, face the sins of this world that come, as part of our everyday lives. He spends some time talking about, two different types of sins, right? What does he describe them as?
Hidden mistakes.
Yeah,
Hidden mistakes, and then the
mistakes.
ones that we do, presumptuous.
Yeah. Hidden mistakes and willful sins, right? So he's, David's, realizing that as sometimes, all of us should do, we walk through life in sin, sometimes without even realizing it on our own. We, not it's intentional, in a way, but it's very possible that, that creeps into our lives today, right? Or we're just unaware, that, whether it be arrogance or pride or, so many different things, right? That sometimes we can be unaware of in our own lives. That, what a wonderful heart David has, to think and say, God, search my heart, search me for times that I can't, that I'm not aware of, I'm not realizing, that are hidden from me, and forgive me of those. And also help me watch out for the ones that I know are out to get me, the ones that I know I'm struggling with. For us to, have that relationship with God, in any comparison to David, it has to be, us realizing how short we fall, and when we fall, it just has to simply ask him to help us, to watch us at all times, to give us his hand, to guide us through. And, it just kind of is said beautifully, there at the very last verse, to say, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. And so, when I thought about his rock and his redeemer, we started talking about the sun, the stars, this creation, being something that can be the rock, a place that's the refuge. And then by his will and by his law, he's our redeemer. And so, he's, it's hard to add much more, to David's words there. But anybody else have any thoughts on his thoughts on sin? Or
I think, looking at how the chapter builds, in the beginning he's looking at nature and he's really in awe. But then there's this point that we realize as we're looking at nature, we're not outside looking into a looking glass, we are participants. And so then you see this really beautiful symphony going on in nature and within us, with each other and in ourselves and with God. And there's this relationship. So it's like how, the pollinators need the thing, it's just this constant going back and forth in this light, and God has created this and we are part of this. And then it's okay, for me at least, it's like I don't want to be separated from that, and I don't want to be negative impact on what is going on here on
Yeah.
earth.
Well, I think that's absolutely true to David's thoughts, right? He's looking at a perfect creation, a perfect law, and he's getting introspective here and, thinking about his imperfections. And, asking for, God to intervene, to make him a part of this perfect world. So, thank you guys very much. We will, on Wednesday, we are going to study Psalms 22 and 31. So 22 and 31, we'll touch 33 a little bit, just so Brian doesn't get me for staying off schedule.